always considered himself unlucky in love, but he would have laughed at anyone who told him his luck would take an interstellar detour into chaos. Tarsi's 9, the sprawling human colony perched on the rim of the Vera Nebula, was a place where neon lights reflected off titanium skyways, and gravity wells could be politely requested or stubbornly ignored, depending on the whim of the station's artificial intelligence. Julian's apartment was a cramped capsule in Sector 14, its walls lined with maintenance panels and his favorite collection of retro Earth snacks, which mostly served as evidence of a life devoted to personal comfort rather than social courage. He had once tried dating, unsuccessfully, and now, after 3 zero-gravity coffee spills and a self-inflicted minor electrical shock from his own smart toaster, he had begun to accept that romance was not on his star chart. And then, as if the universe had finally grown bored of his mundane existence, the docking bay lights flickered violet, and a low hum shook the station. Julian, carrying a bag of instant noodles and a stubborn sense of curiosity, was drawn toward the chaos like a moth to a particularly flashy flame. Through the panoramic viewport, he saw her first, the alien vampire queen of legend, Lirathis, descending from the shuttle bay in a cascade of auroras and holographic flares. Her long ears caught the light, curved elegantly toward the sides of her head, and for a moment, Julian's entire brain decided to take a vacation. She didn't just enter the colony. She arrived as if the very air around her had agreed to bend and shimmer, creating a corridor of iridescence wherever she stepped. "Chosen," she said, her voice cutting across the hum of engines and the murmur of curious colonists, landing somewhere between a hiss and a laugh, perfectly balanced between playful menace and amusement. Julian stumbled over a luggage drone, his noodles flipping in a tragic arc, and landed in a heap. She looked down, her gaze sharp yet strangely entertained, and Julian wondered if he was the first human ever considered both a fool and interesting at the same time. Adjusting to her presence was like learning to walk on a comet, thrilling, dizzying, and occasionally painful. Lirathis had a habit of appearing in places he didn't expect, sometimes clinging upside down from the ceiling beams, sometimes whispering warnings or advice that made him more terrified than reassured. "Try not to spill your coffee in a zero-gravity chamber," she would murmur with mock seriousness, while casually igniting a faint aura of violet energy around her fingertips. Julian, who had been merely trying to navigate the chaos of his own clumsiness, had to suppress a laugh while carefully securing his mug. "Right, because coffee explosions are totally the worst interstellar crises we face," he muttered under his breath, earning a smirk that made his knees wobble and his pulse spike like a hyperdrive engine. She moved with a grace that defied physics and sense alike. Julian discovered that when she was nearby, he had to recalibrate everything: gravity, timing, and even his vocabulary. He had once prided himself on his dry humor, but every joke felt undercooked in her presence, which was simultaneously terrifying and oddly exhilarating. Yet he couldn't deny that the moments of levity, her teasing remarks, and the occasional accidental chaos she brought to his life were becoming something he craved. For instance, one morning she had decided to teach him a lesson about reflexes by dropping a holographic decoy of a Shiren assassin onto his bed. Julian had jumped, screamed, and then cursed with the elegance of a badly programmed android. Lirathis had laughed, a deep, resonant sound that echoed in the steel corridors, and then promptly vanished, leaving him to stew in embarrassment, noodles, and adrenaline. The colony, meanwhile, was in uproar. Colonists whispered, AI units speculated, and rogue maintenance drones began projecting "Welcome Lirathis" banners that mostly fell in glitched, neon tangles. Everyone wanted a glimpse of her. Julian, unfortunately, seemed to have become the accidental magnet. She would glance at him with that strange mixture of predatory focus and ironic amusement, and suddenly, the mundane became dangerous in the most thrilling way. On one particularly dull day, she had barged into the central cafeteria, perched on the railing like a violet-streaked gargoyle, and declared that Julian's choice of utensils was unworthy of a being capable of bravery and noodle consumption. The crowd had gasped, Julian had laughed, and the droids had all filed formal complaints about having to witness such behavior. Through it all, Julian began to understand the peculiar rhythm of their connection. Lirathis was terrifying, dazzling, and chaotic, yet there was a method to her madness, a fascination with him that he couldn't explain and certainly couldn't ignore. Each interaction wove them closer together. Moments of sharp humor, shared crises with malfunctioning interstellar tech, and quiet, unspoken glances in the rare moments when the colony's chaos dimmed to the soft hum of energy conduits. She taught him to navigate alien customs, combat the occasional rogue Shiren guard, and even handle the sometimes absurd demands of her court. Julian, armed with a blend of sarcastic resilience and human adaptability, began to feel less like a hapless pawn and more like a participant in a story that was larger than himself, yet somehow centered entirely around him. Julian woke to the gentle vibration of his quarters, a rhythmic hum that was supposed to be a wake-up alert but felt more like a miniature starquake. Somehow, the first thing on his mind wasn't the routine maintenance reports or the colony's ever-buzzing drones. It was Lirathis. The alien vampire queen had taken up the peculiar habit of materializing wherever he was, often without warning, which made mornings an unpredictable blend of terror, curiosity, and caffeine deprivation. Today, she hovered near the ceiling, long ears twitching as though evaluating the quality of his bed-making skills, or lack thereof. "You know," she said with a tilt of her head that could have been mocking if it weren't so captivating, "if you're going to survive life in my orbit, you might want to start with something as simple as making your bed without accidentally electrocuting yourself." Julian blinked, unsure whether to laugh or panic, then opted for both. "Right," he said, "because my linens have a vendetta against me." Breakfast was a performance. Julian tried, desperately, to make instant coffee without attracting another minor catastrophe, while Lirathis floated above, observing with a mixture of amusement and impatience. The colony's gravity regulators, tuned to human preferences, didn't entirely cooperate with her presence, and she occasionally hovered at odd angles, giving the impression of a violet-streaked hummingbird caught in a gravitational tug-of-war. "Careful," she said, "or your noodles will achieve sentience and revolt." Julian snorted, spilling a few drops of coffee in the process, and she laughed, a sound that seemed to bend the room around them, shimmering in midair like some impossible aurora. Their days quickly settled into a rhythm that no human manual could have prepared him for. Julian learned that walking through a corridor was more akin to navigating an obstacle course designed by a mischievous AI, dodging patrol drones that were convinced he might spontaneously combust from sheer clumsiness, and occasionally explaining to bemused colonists why he appeared to be having a full-blown conversation with thin air. "It's called negotiating," Lirathis would say, appearing just behind him, long ears brushing his shoulder. "And sometimes you have to pretend your opponent is interested in your bad jokes to survive." Julian discovered that, somehow, these intergalactic interactions were not only survivable but astonishingly enjoyable. One afternoon, they were summoned to the Shiren embassy, an elegant structure floating in orbit around Tarsi's 9, shimmering with reflective panels and energy conduits that looked like liquid light. The council had grown increasingly curious and wary about a human mingling with their queen. Julian, armed with a combination of awkward charm and accidental heroism, stepped into the gleaming chamber, nodding politely at hovering ambassadors with too many arms and far too many eyes. Lirathis, of course, glided in behind him, her presence simultaneously regal and terrifying. She whispered, "If you survive this, we might consider you worthy of noodles," and Julian swallowed, unsure whether to be insulted or motivated. The council's questions were pointed, often bordering on absurd. "Why do you insist on human humor? One six-limbed ambassador asked, scanning Julian with what appeared to be internal threat analyzers. Julian, ever the improviser, replied, because sarcasm is universal. Somewhere in the cosmos it's probably written in the laws of physics. A pause. Then Lirathis chuckled softly, a vibration in the air, and the council blinked in unison, which was apparently a Shiren sign of confusion. Julian almost considered it a victory, until the elder with telepathic tentacles suggested that he might be an unusually persistent kind of pest. Lirathis waved a hand, purple energy rippling across the floor, and Julian suddenly felt entirely protected, yet oddly like he was being put on display for a cosmic zoo. Training with Lirathis quickly became an art form. She taught him to navigate low-gravity combat drills, wield anti-gravity blades with style, or at least without severe injury, and anticipate her sudden appearances. Julian discovered that she had an almost cruel sense of humor in training, often vanishing mid-lesson, or pretending to misinterpret his movements in the most excruciatingly theatrical way. Once she released a holographic swarm of Shiren predators into the training hall. Julian panicked, waved his blade wildly, and accidentally activated the emergency sprinklers, soaking both himself and the holograms. Lirathis appeared midair, laughing until she nearly lost control of her flight and muttered, "You are far too entertaining for your own good." The Shiren Council had decided that subtlety was overrated, and diplomacy was for species with less flair. Julian, standing beside Lirathis in the orbiting chamber that resembled a cathedral made of liquid light, could feel the weight of 100 judgmental stares. Or at least, he assumed that was what those six-limbed, bioluminescent ambassadors were doing with their multiple eyes. One particularly large counselor, whose appendages reminded Julian of tangled wires and suspiciously resembled leftover maintenance drones, leaned forward with the elegance of a creature entirely unaccustomed to patience. "Queen Lirathis," it began, voice slithering through the chamber, "why do you persist in this anomalous association with a human? It is unprecedented and frankly inconvenient." Julian, who had spent the past weeks learning the subtle art of looking confident while feeling like he might accidentally trip into an anti-gravity conduit, swallowed. He could feel the Queen's presence beside him, the energy around her vibrating faintly like a purr. "Unprecedented," he said cautiously, "isn't that kind of your thing? I mean, I've seen worse in warp tunnels, trust me." The chamber was silent for a beat. Then Lirathis tilted her head, violet light rippling along her sleek form, and let out a laugh that made the air itself shimmer. Julian realized that humor, even in the presence of interstellar judgment, was something he could wield, albeit nervously. Before the council could summon another verbal volley, the alarm screamed, vibrating, holographic, and somehow melodramatic, as only interstellar emergencies could be. A rogue faction of cybernetic Shiren mercenaries had breached the docking arrays, intent on kidnapping or eliminating anyone involved in this scandalous human queen affair. Julian, nearly panicking but bolstered by weeks of training in improvisation, low-gravity duels, and occasional chaos management, lunged for an anti-gravity stabilizer. Lirathis followed, moving with the elegance and lethal precision of a predator who had already decided that fun was part of survival. The ensuing chaos was a ballet of humor and danger. Julian tripped over a hovering console and accidentally fired a plasma pulse, which sent a group of rogue drones spinning into the chamber's energy conduits. Lirathis swooped past, grabbing his arm mid-fall and muttering, "You really are your own disaster zone, aren't you?" Julian, dangling precariously, shot her a sheepish grin. "I aim to impress," he said. She laughed, a sound that seemed to ripple in harmony with the hum of the docking arrays. Together, they navigated collapsing walkways, dodged plasma bolts, and managed to corral the mercenaries into containment fields with a mixture of precision, luck, and Julian's persistent sarcasm. When the battle ended, Julian was bruised, singed, and holding a malfunctioning plasma blade like a trophy of ridiculous heroism. Lirathis hovered beside him, long ears twitching, her violet aura softening in the quiet aftermath. "You're growing into this chaos," she said, a rare note of seriousness in her voice. Julian realized she meant more than battle skills. She meant confidence, adaptability, and courage he hadn't known he possessed. He laughed softly, though it was tinged with relief. "Or maybe I'm just incredibly lucky," he said, brushing a streak of plasma dust from his jacket. The council, surprisingly impressed by the spectacle and perhaps slightly entertained, conferred in a flurry of bioluminescent signals. By the time they returned their attention to Julian and Lirathis, the decision had been made. The human could remain by her side, not as a subordinate or a pawn, but as a recognized partner in the grand, chaotic tapestry of her life. Julian blinked, absorbing the absurdity and weight of it. "So, I get to stay?" he asked. Lirathis, hovering nearby with a smirk that could have powered a small city, tilted her head. "You've survived diplomacy, danger, and your own ineptitude. I think that qualifies as staying," she said, and Julian laughed, a deep, unrestrained sound that carried across the chamber. Back on Tarsi's 9, life settled into a new normal. Though normal now included purple-tinged auroras, spontaneous zero-gravity flips, and the occasional need to explain to colonists why their queen had taken a human under her wing. Julian, once a man defined by hesitation and clumsiness, now moved with a quiet confidence. He had learned to navigate alien politics, survive rogue mercenaries, and even laugh in the face of catastrophe. More importantly, he had discovered a courage and adaptability that the mundane routines of life had never required. And yet, it was in the quieter moments, the shared meals of improbably cooked noodles in zero-G, the soft glow of violet light across the titanium corridors, the teasing banter that somehow always carried undertones of sincerity, that Julian realized the most profound transformation had occurred. He had been chosen by a being of immense power, wild elegance, and untamed beauty, and in return he had learned to choose himself, to embrace uncertainty, humor, and even the occasional danger as part of the adventure. Lirathis, in turn, revealed through laughter, patience, and moments of tender absurdity that even a queen could find delight in the unpredictable, the chaotic, and the wholly human. One night, floating above the neon-lit sprawl of Tarsi's 9, Julian leaned against the observation railing, long ears brushing softly against him as Lirathis hovered nearby, violet energy painting the corridors like liquid light. He realized the truth of their bond. Love was not a gentle gravity, pulling predictably and evenly. It was a magnetic storm, unpredictable, wild, and magnificent, capable of uprooting worlds and planting new ones in their wake. They had survived councils, mercenaries, and interstellar chaos. They had survived themselves. And in that survival, Julian found a joy deeper than fear, a connection stronger than caution, and a life that was no longer ordinary but extraordinary, luminous, and entirely, unapologetically his own. With a grin and a final glance at the auroras below, Julian knew that the universe had not merely chosen him. It had challenged him, entertained him, and ultimately transformed him. And he would follow that wild, untamed path with Lirathis by his side, laughter echoing through the cosmos, a human and an alien queen defying expectation, fear, and the very laws of interstellar romance together.